In Chapter 9, we are going to be diving into molecular biology, which scares a lot of people, but we are going to be able to get through it. So in this chapter, we're going to be talking about DNA and how DNA controls the operations of your cells. DNA is made of nucleic acids that carry information for the functioning of your cell. So here's a picture of Dolly, which was the first cloned mammal, and she had some interesting problems that we'll talk about later, because you think a clone is an exact copy, but there were some things that came up. Something that I wanted to show you was that you can't really predict how complex an organism is based on the number of chromosomes that it has. So here's a chart, and it shows that for adder's tongue fern, there's 1,200, just over 1,200 different chromosomes. So this is just a fern plant, you know. And then an alligator has 32, a carrot has 18. So is an alligator twice as complicated as a carrot? Not necessarily. I mean, humans have 46, and a gorilla has 48. Earthworm has 36. So it's really just, there's not a lot of definite rhyme or reason to how complicated something is based on how many chromosomes it has. So an early pioneer of figuring out the structure of DNA was actually Rosalind Franklin, and here's a picture of her. She worked really hard to get these x-rays of DNA structure by doing something called X-ray diffraction. And her early models ended up being a really foundational part for Watson and Crick, who were two people that came along later and used this and tried to figure out what does this look like in 3D, and came up with the traditional twisted, like double helix ladder that you hear about now and is very commonly thought of as DNA. And here is just a picture from your book with Watson and Crick and some of the x-rays that Rosalind Franklin worked on. So DNA actually has some basic building blocks. So with DNA, there's always let me get past this. Our genes are in chromosomes, and DNA makes up our chromosomes, but it's a very long polymer, and it's a twisted ladder shape. So I'm going to show you what that is. Now in this picture, you have like a green line and a black line, and these two sides are complementary together. They actually fit together sort of like a lock and key, where they're not the same, but they fit. So one strand of DNA is made up of a phosphate, which is these circles, and then a deoxyribose, which is the pentagon here. And then you can see that repeats. So a phosphate and a deoxyribose, and a phosphate and a deoxyribose, and a phosphate and a deoxyribose, all the way down. And then you can see that there's these other little tags that stick off, and those are the nitrogenous bases. So the makeup of DNA is a phosphate group, a deoxyribose sugar, and a nitrogenous base. That's what makes up all of DNA. And additionally, these little tags actually have matches that go with them, and we are going to show you that. But first, the phosphate group holds the sugar to the helix strand. So I'm going to go back up. The phosphate sugar holds to the double helix strand. And there's a covalent bond here. A covalent bond is really strong. It's covalent bonds that actually hold this backbone of phosphate and deoxyriboses together. And that's a very strong bond. The importance of that is that these little matching tags that hold the two sides of the ladder together, that's actually a much weaker bond called a hydrogen bond. So I want to show you that here. So this backbone is held together by this blue down here. This is held together by covalent bonds, which are very strong, powerful bonds. And then in between the two, and that's these colored areas here, they are held together by hydrogen bonds, which are much weaker bonds. So the support sides of the ladder is made up of the sugar and the phosphate, and they alternate all the way up, sugar and phosphates. So that's the phosphate, the deoxyribose, and the nitrogenous base. And if that looks familiar to you, that is because you just change it slightly, and suddenly it is a molecule that we've already talked about called ATP. So they're very similar. So DNA is very, very, very long. It's huge. And there's 4 different bases inside of your DNA. They are cytosine, thymine, adenine, and guanine. I want you to really, really write these down and get to know them. Cytosine is just represented with a C, thymine with a T, adenine with an A, and guanine with a G. A and T, thymine and adenine, these two always pair to each other. It's like a lock and key that fit together. And cytosine always pairs with guanine. So I'm going to show you these. We're going to pass this by. So it's basically showing you here just how the two sides fit together like a zipper, and those are held together by hydrogen bonds. The importance of that is that hydrogen bonds are really weak, so that DNA can be broken apart and then replicated up and down the lines of the ladder, so those bonds can be broken. So remember that cytosine always pairs with guanine, and adenine pairs with thymine. And this leads to something called Chargaff's rule. And Chargaff's rule was basically that adenine and thymine always join together, and cytosine and guanine always pair together. So A with T, that's easy for me because it spells add, and C with G will always bond together. I want to show you in this model how both, the nucleus contains your DNA, and your DNA contains all the information that you need to manufacture every type of protein produced by any cell in your body, no matter what it is specifically. So prokaryotes have a single circular DNA, which you can see, like they'll have a single circle DNA, whereas eukaryotes, which are here, that's a eukaryote. A eukaryote will have a linear DNA, which is double-stranded, and it tends to be a lot more complex. Both the eukaryotes and the prokaryotes use the process of transcription and translation to make proteins. So those are the main things that I wanted you to get from this, and just some interesting things about DNA by the numbers. Each cell has about 2 meters of DNA, which means, and since you have 75 trillion cells, you have enough DNA in your body to go back and forth to the sun 4 million times. It really is fascinating how complicated and how tiny this is in your body. So that was section 9.1, and we'll break this chapter up.